The words hung in the air heavier than the smell of reheated coffee. Either serve Jessica or leave Mom. Michael Patterson didn't look up from the television. The touchdown from his team sounded like a sentence. Jessica, arms crossed, looked away. Eleanor Ellie Patterson felt the floor shift beneath her, but her voice came out steady. "Those are words you can't take back, son." She set her mug on the coffee table, took the still warm house keys from her pocket, and walked toward her bedroom. There was no anger, just a thick silence, as if time had stopped in this suburban Michigan home. The grandfather clock in the hallway showed 5:30 p.m. when Eleanor opened her closet door. Everything was in its place, as always. The blue suitcase, the floral scarf photographs of her late husband Robert watching her from the nightstand. Each item had its spot, as if anticipating that one day she would need to leave calmly without making a sound. As she folded 2 blouses and a pair of slacks, her son's voice continued to echo in her head. "Serve Jessica or leave." It was astonishing how a single phrase could erase 32 years of devotion. Eleanor looked out the window. October sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, painting the furniture she'd purchased on installment plans in shades of amber. She remembered the day Michael was born at Oak Ridge General Hospital. Almost 9 pounds, the doctor said he would grow into a strong man. And he had, physically at least, but not in heart. In the living room, the football game continued. She heard Jessica murmur something, perhaps a finally or about time. Eleanor didn't respond. Instead, she opened her dresser drawer and pulled out her old notebook, the one where she recorded every expense, every dollar she had sent Michael when he first got married. The rent, the car down payment, the house installments. Everything. "He even took my thanks away," she thought. Eleanor closed the suitcase, took a deep breath, and crossed the doorway. She didn't expect Michael to stop her. He didn't. The metal gate creaked as she pulled it closed. Outside, the air smelled of autumn leaves and freshly baked bread from the bakery down the street. The neighborhood was quiet, only the ice cream truck making its final rounds of the season, its jingle growing fainter. She walked to the corner rosary beads clutched between her fingers. Where do I go, she wondered, but her body already knew the answer. The Whispering Pines boarding house near the farmer's market, where her friend from the church choir, Martha Wilson, worked as a manager. There she would find a clean bed and silence, even if temporary. As she walked, Eleanor remembered all the times she had refused to listen to gossip neighbors warning her that Michael was treating Jessica poorly, that there were debts at the bank, that he was selling things from his workplace. She always responded, "My son knows what he's doing." Now she understood that sometimes love blinds more than faith. At Whispering Pines, Martha opened the door with a sad smile. "Michael again." Eleanor nodded. This time was the last time. They offered her a simple room with a single bed, an old fan, and a crucifix hanging slightly crooked on the wall. She placed her suitcase on the chair, sat down, and let exhaustion settle in her bones. That night she didn't eat dinner. She lit a candle before the small image of the Virgin Mary she always carried with her. In her notebook she wrote, "Day 1, left home, didn't cry, didn't look back." The distant sound of barking dogs and motorcycles lulled her to sleep. For the first time in many years, she fell asleep without worrying whether the television was too loud or if Michael needed money for gas. At dawn, she went down to the boarding house patio. The aroma of fresh coffee embraced her like a hug. Martha served her a steaming cup. "What are you going to do now, Ellie?" She smiled with serenity. "Start over. But first turn off the money faucets." The day was just beginning, but something had changed inside her. It wasn't sadness, but clarity. Sometimes to regain peace, you must let go of the roof you built yourself. That morning, Eleanor walked to the bank with her head held high. The October sun in Oak Ridge shone warm and steady on her face. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew she wouldn't return to a life where respect was begged for. The bank smelled of air conditioning and expensive perfume. Eleanor sat in the seniors line, her notebook in hand. Each page was a piece of her history, a silent record of misunderstood love, the loans for Michael, the insurance payments, the fixed deposits every 2 weeks. While waiting for her turn, she observed the tired faces around her. Some read newspapers. Others stared at the clock with resignation. Next to her, a gentleman with a cane smiled. "Coming to collect your pension." "I'm coming to turn off the tap for my son," she replied, half joking, half serious. The man let out a short laugh. Eleanor didn't. She knew this step meant more than money. It was cutting the cord that had tied her down for years. When they finally called her, she rose slowly. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you? I want to cancel all automatic transfers to my son Michael Patterson's account and also deactivate the additional cards in his name. The young teller typed quickly. Are you sure they appear as family beneficiaries? That's precisely why I don't want to keep confusing help with obligation. The click of the keyboard sounded like liberation, with each confirmation one less weight on her shoulders. Done, ma'am. Would you like a printed receipt? Yes, please, and email me too. I want proof of everything. She filed the papers with the precision of someone archiving their new independence. She left the bank. The sun was intense, but it no longer weighed her down. She walked to the insurance company where she maintained a family policy. At reception, a kind-voiced woman attended to her. What would you like to modify? I want to remove my son and his wife as beneficiaries of the car insurance. They no longer live with me. The woman looked up surprised. Are you sure that might affect the coverage? I'm more certain than ever, dear. As she signed the form, she remembered the first time Michael had asked for help with the car. Just for 2 months, Mom. Then I'll pay it back. 2 months became 5 years, and she, without realizing, had financed both his comfort and his pride. As she left, she breathed deeply. The air smelled of gasoline and freedom. That same afternoon, she went to the electric company. At the counter, she requested to change the customer number and separate her account from the house where Michael and Jessica lived. I don't want my bills mixed with theirs anymore, she explained. The employee nodded mechanically, but Eleanor felt each procedure was a small victory. When she returned to the boarding house, the sun was already setting behind the rooftops. In the courtyard, Martha was sweeping fallen leaves. How did it go? Well, I closed everything. I just have the health insurance and credit cards left, but I'll handle those tomorrow. They dined together on sweet bread and warm milk. Eleanor recounted every detail, how the employees looked at her, how she felt her voice tremble and then grow stronger. And does Michael know? Not yet, but he will when the cashier says his card was declined. They laughed, but deep down Eleanor felt a pang. Not of guilt, but of nostalgia, because loving a son doesn't disappear even when it hurts. God, she thought, teach me to love without hurting myself again. Before sleeping, she opened her notebook and wrote Day 2, canceled transfers, insurance, and cards. Each signature was a farewell. It hurts, but I breathe better. At midnight, her cell phone vibrated. A message from Jessica. Mother-in-law, Michael is upset. He says you humiliated him. Can you come talk to him? Eleanor looked at the screen for a few seconds, then turned off the phone. At dawn, she went to the farmer's market to buy bread and flowers for the Virgin. The stalls were full of voices and scents, cinnamon-roasted corn fruits. She greeted everyone with her usual smile, but inside she felt something different: lightness. Back at the boarding house, she called her friend at the bank, Frank Davis, who had been her husband's colleague. Frank, I need you to check something. I want to know if Michael has tried to use the house for a loan. On the other end, a brief silence. Let me check, Eleanor. I'll call you in the afternoon. But why do you suspect? Because when you cut off, the money secrets come out. That phrase accompanied her for the rest of the day. She spent hours in the small chapel of the boarding house, praying before the Virgin. She didn't ask for punishment, only clarity for truth to arrive, even if it hurt. As night fell while the fan hummed, her cell phone rang again. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. On the third ring, she picked up. Eleanor, it's Frank. We need to talk tomorrow at the cafe on the corner by the bank. What I discovered isn't good. Her heart tightened, but her voice remained steady. I'll be there. She hung up, and before turning off the light, wrote in her notebook, Day 3. Something is hidden. Tomorrow I'll know what, but I'm not afraid anymore. She blew out the candle. In the silence, crickets chirped as if accompanying her decision. The corner cafe smelled of freshly baked muffins and early morning conversation. Cups clinked like little domestic bells. Frank was already waiting at the back table, the newspaper folded in 4, and his tired smile. His hair was grayer than the last time she had seen him, but his eyes remained firm, the kind you recognize as a safe harbor in bad weather. Eleanor, he said, standing up. Thanks for coming so early. If you called me this urgently, it couldn't wait, she replied. She felt the delicate weight of her notebook in her purse, as if it too wanted to listen. The waiter left 2 black coffees. Frank stirred his calmly, like someone searching for words at the bottom of the cup. Yesterday I checked the system, he began, and found old but recent applications. Your son tried to process a loan with your house as collateral. He brought papers. Let's say very presentable. Too presentable. The blow was dry inside, not a thunderclap, but that crack in the tile you discover when washing your favorite plate. Forged? She asked, her mouth drier than toast without butter. That's what we think. The property title he presented doesn't match what's in the public registry. Our legal department detected it and rejected the operation. Eleanor, this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a clear intention. The teaspoon slipped from her fingers and hit the saucer with a clink that pierced her chest. She looked out the window. The sun was filtering between the shadows of the awnings, illuminating the dust floating in the air. She thought of Michael's crib, his first steps down the mosaic hallway, his laughter when he learned to ride a bicycle. Where does a sun's thread twist? Thank you for telling me, Frank. Her voice came out different, deeper. I need to confirm everything at the notary's office. Go see Attorney Goldstein. She's as straight as an old ruler. She'll tell you what's what without embellishment. Eleanor nodded, they paid, and as they left the city, sounded of impatient horns and birds. To her, something else buzzed the word premeditated. Sarah Goldstein's law office smelled of polished wood and ink. In the reception area, a secretary with glasses asked for her ID and folio number. Eleanor carried everything in a small green folder with dividers and notes. She had learned from Robert, her late husband, that life is better organized when papers are too. Wait here a moment, ma'am, said the young woman, taking her documents. Attorney Goldstein received her in an office where a ceiling fan sliced the stillness into pieces. She had large hands, as if she had carried boxes besides sealing documents. How can I help you, Mrs. Patterson? I want to verify my house's ownership and know if someone tried to move anything without my permission. The attorney opened her computer with a sigh that Eleanor didn't know whether was routine or pity. She typed, searched, compared. You are the owner with no current liens. The other she gestured to her assistant, who entered with a folder. Yes, there was an attempt to present an updated title. It didn't get past the counter. The seal didn't match the series from that year. Whoever prepared it knew what they were doing, but not enough. Eleanor felt a pang of sad pride in the purity of systems when they work, and rage a cold new rage that didn't burn but illuminated. Thank you, Attorney Goldstein. Now I need guidance, not to press charges yet, but to protect myself. What steps do you recommend? First, file a report with the police in case the situation escalates. Second, legally notify the occupants of your home with an eviction notice if they've violated cohabitation agreements. And third, secure your original documentation in a safety deposit box. Do you have somewhere to stay meanwhile? Yes, I'm at a boarding house, and the documentation. She clutched her folder. This is a copy. The originals are with me. Very good. Don't leave your house alone these days. And, she lowered her voice, have patience. Slippery truths end up falling on their own, but they make noise. Eleanor thanked her with that handshake one reserves for doctors who don't lie and lawyers who don't negotiate with conscience. Outside, the midday sun hit her like a hot hand. She walked slowly. Each step was a silent phrase. No more. Enough is enough. At the police station, Officer Brennan received her with the sober courtesy of one who listens more than speaks. A dark-skinned man with a thin mustache with eyes that seemed to measure the temperature of words. I want to file a report, she said, and note that I left my house due to an ultimatum from my son. I also want to report that there was an attempt to use my property as collateral without permission. Was there physical aggression? No. There was a phrase that admits no return. Sometimes that weighs more than a push. He indicated a chair. Take your time, ma'am. She related what was necessary. She didn't add embellishments. The naked truth already had enough edge. The officer nodded, asked short questions, wrote in neat handwriting. I recommend you file an eviction notice if that's your decision. We can accompany you when you notify them. You are not alone. 4 words like a good shadow under the sun. She left and bought an orange juice at the corner cart. The acidity awakened her desire to cry, but she held back. Not out of pride, but because she wanted the tears to come only when they had a destination, either in church or on the pillow, not on the sidewalk. At 4 p.m., her phone vibrated, one missed call, then another and another. In 10 minutes, 5. Michael's number, Jessica's, and an unknown one. She turned off the sound. It wasn't the time to listen to reproaches dressed as urgency. Eleanor returned to the boarding house. Martha was watering the plants. How did it go, Ellie? I found what I feared. But I also found straight people. That's worth gold. She passed her a pitcher of cool water. Drink up, the truth dehydrates. They laughed a little. Humor, however minimal, is that animal cracker that life offers you when you've run out of bread. She went up to her room, took out her notebook, wrote with a firmer hand, Day 3. Attempted loan with forged papers. The house remains in my name. Report filed. Next step, eviction notice. 5 missed calls. The fan rotated like a slow clock. At 6 p.m., more notifications sounded. 12 calls. A voice message from Michael that she started and stopped. She didn't want his version yet. Then it vibrated again, an audio message from Jessica. She hesitated. She opened the file. Her voice came out broken, as if she were running and speaking at the same time. Mother-in-law, I didn't know, I swear. Michael told me at the bank that it was a procedure. I need to speak with you alone. Something doesn't add up. Please. The please hung like a damp garment that takes time to dry. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She closed her eyes. She listened to the dryness of the day, Frank's voice, the notary's seal, the officer's pen, the buzz of her own dignity freshly awakened. Night fell with the smell of hot tortillas and old radios. In the courtyard, someone was humming an old love song. She looked out the window. The neighborhood lights flickered like tired fireflies. She felt the urge to call Jessica to offer her a corner of truth, a chair to sit on, but she preferred to let silence do its work. Haste is a bad secretary of clarity. She went to bed with the rosary between her fingers. She asked the Virgin for only one thing: for the truth to arrive complete, without half measures, and that when it arrived, she would have a clean face to look at it straight on. Her phone vibrated again on the nightstand, another call. The 6th was Jessica, and in her insistence was something that wasn't theater. Something didn't add up. The news spread faster than the smell of hot bread at the farmer's market. In less than 2 days, all of Oak Ridge seemed to have a different version of what had happened between Michael and his mother, that the lady was sick, that they had thrown her out for arguing with the daughter-in-law, that there was a medical emergency, and poor Eleanor was wandering the streets disoriented. She heard the whispers whenever she went to the flower stand or to buy tomatoes. The gossips would lower their voices, but not enough. They say she lost her memory, poor thing. No man, the old woman is crazy, she sold the house. Each rumor was a new nail in the cross they had hung on her without permission. Martha, who heard everything from her small store, was indignant. What nerve, Ellie? That boy is saying you have dementia, that they fired him from work because of you. Eleanor breathed deeply, holding the bunch of lilies she had just bought. Let them talk. The truth doesn't need defense, just time. But inside her, something was boiling, not with rage, but with bitter sadness. For your own son to use you as a smokescreen hurts more than any offense. The following Thursday, she decided to go to the bank. She needed to sign some papers she had pending for insurance. When she entered, she felt the stares. A pair of tellers whispered. One recognized her and lowered her eyes. In line, someone murmured, "That's the lady from the fight." The air was heavy, as if the unspoken words floated at the counter. Michael appeared. He came with a poorly ironed shirt and a forehead beaded with sweat. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice bounced off the marble walls. "Look what you're causing. Everyone is judging us." Eleanor maintained her composure. "It's not me who put myself under judgment, son. I was just trying to help you. It was a loan to fix the house. With forged papers," she completed. The murmur in the bank stopped. Everyone pretended not to look, but each ear was attentive. Michael lowered his voice, tense. "We could have fixed this at home." "That's no longer my home, Michael." Jessica entered behind him, pale. She stood beside Eleanor. "Michael, enough." Her voice trembled, but it had a new firmness. Eleanor saw it in her eyes. She had discovered more than she was saying. Michael turned and left. His shadow remained stuck to the glass door. Jessica took Eleanor by the arm. "I need to talk to you, mother-in-law." "Not here." They met on a bench in the park in front of the fountain, where children threw breadcrumbs to pigeons. Jessica removed her dark glasses and said, almost whispering, "Michael lied to me. He told me the loan was with your consent, and I found papers gambling debts. I don't know how to stop him." The water from the fountain splashed onto Eleanor's skirt, cold like the revelation. "You can't stop someone who hasn't hit rock bottom yet, dear, but you can decide not to sink with him." Jessica lowered her head. "I have nowhere to go." "You have yourself. That's more than you think. That night, local social networks already had their spectacle. On the neighborhood's Facebook group, someone posted Eleanor Patterson leaves her son in ruins. Photos of her house circulated as if they were trophies. It hurt her to see her life turned into digital gossip, but she didn't respond. Instead, she wrote in her notebook, Day 4, they call me crazy, ungrateful, witch. It doesn't matter what they say as long as I walk in peace. At midnight, they knocked on the boarding house door. 3 dry, impatient knocks. Martha peered out the window. Who is it? A male voice answered. Open up. I need to talk to Eleanor. The tone was familiar. Michael, she's not here. Go away, responded Martha without fear. She's my mother. And that's exactly why you should let her rest. They heard him walking away, throwing a curse into the air. The hallway lights flickered. Silence returned with the smell of contained fear. The next day, Pastor Jim Thompson came to see her. He had heard the gossip and wanted to know the truth. Eleanor felt like a child in front of the confessor. I'm not looking for revenge, Pastor, she said, but I don't want to keep being complicit in abuse either. The pastor nodded slowly. Forgiveness is not given before setting boundaries, daughter. First respect, then forgiveness. His words stayed with her. That afternoon, when the neighbors gathered in front of the market for their neighborhood meeting, she went too. She wanted to look them in the eyes. They say I'm crazy, she told them calmly, but my only delusion was confusing love with servitude. If that's madness, I accept it. A murmur of discomfort ran through the group. In the back, someone applauded. It was Frank. The rumor broke. And so little by little, the neighborhood began to see the other version, the true one. That night, as she arranged her papers, her phone vibrated again. 18 missed calls. Michael, Jessica, unknown numbers. Fear tried to creep in, but this time it found no door. She lit a candle and wrote, Day 5, 18 calls. I didn't answer any. It's not silence of cowardice, it's silence of respect. Martha looked at her from the hallway. Are you going to press charges, Ellie? Not yet. First, I want to make sure everything is protected, and if he comes back, then he'll see I'm not the same. And she wasn't. The war of versions no longer touched her. When the truth starts to walk, rumors get tired. The next step would be legal, but above all, moral. Saturday's dawn arrived covered in clouds, as if the sky also needed to think before acting. Eleanor got up early, combed her gray hair into a tight bun, and stored in her purse the documents that Attorney Goldstein had prepared for her, the eviction notice and the certified copy of the police report. That morning her hands were not trembling. Fear had gone, leaving in its place a hard but serene clarity. At the entrance of the boarding house, Martha offered her an improvised blessing with rose water. May the Lord accompany you, Ellie, and if he gets angry, yell loudly. Eleanor smiled. There's no need to yell when you carry the truth in your pocket. The patrol car was waiting for her in front of the church with Officer Brennan at the wheel. Ready, ma'am? Ready, son. Let's put the cards on the table. The journey to the house was silent. They passed by the market, by the bakery where Eleanor used to buy every morning. The stand still smelled of warm dough and butter. Everything remained the same except for her. When they arrived, the gate was ajar. The garden, once well kept, was full of weeds. Michael had left the hose lying around, and the dog barked with a fury she didn't recognize. Michael appeared at the door, disheveled, with an unbuttoned shirt. What are you doing here? I've come to deliver a legal document and to collect my things. You're bringing cops to your own son. I didn't bring them out of fear, I brought them for order. The officer calmly explained the procedure. Michael laughed a bitter laugh. And now who filled your head with nonsense, that old woman from the bank? I filled it myself, son, with dignity. The officer handed him a copy of the notice. Michael tore it up in front of them, the pieces falling to the ground like black feathers. That's worth nothing. Brennan didn't flinch. The official copy is sealed, sir. I recommend you find a lawyer before continuing to tear up little papers. Jessica appeared behind with a suitcase in hand. I'm leaving with her. Michael looked at her as if he didn't understand the language. What, I can't live like this anymore, Michael. Not with lies, not with fear. He took a step toward her, but the officer intervened. Easy, let's not make this bigger. Michael stood still, his eyes full of a fury that no longer knew where to place itself. Eleanor entered the house. Everything was still in its place, but the air was charged with resentment. On the dining table, she found a pile of receipts, an opened envelope from the bank, and an ashtray full of cigarette butts. That house, which was once a family temple, was now an inhabited ruin. She took a picture of Robert, her late husband, and carefully stored it in her bag. "We're leaving Robert," she murmured, but not defeated. Back at the boarding house, Jessica was crying silently. Martha hugged her without questions. "There's room here for those who learn to start over," she said. Eleanor prepared coffee. The smell filled the room like a balm. "Don't worry, dear. The hardest beginnings are the cleanest." That afternoon, Attorney Goldstein called her. "Mrs. Patterson, we received a notification from the bank. They tried to move funds in your name, but they are now blocked. I recommend registering the house as protected property." "Do it, Attorney, and thank you." For the first time in years, she felt that the ground beneath her feet was hers without conditions. The following days were a tense calm. Michael didn't come looking for her directly, but the rumors continued. Some said he had been fired from his workshop, others that he was borrowing money to recover what was his. Eleanor decided to go to Sunday Mass. She entered the church with the rosary between her fingers. Pastor Jim spoke about forgiveness. To forgive is not to forget. It's to remember without hatred, and that is achieved only when one respects oneself first. She felt tears not of sadness, but of relief. After Mass, several neighbors approached her. "Mrs. Patterson, we're sorry. We didn't know the truth." "Don't worry, dears. Lies are in a hurry. The truth arrives walking, but it arrives." A week later, the police called Eleanor. "Ma'am, your son has been arrested for document forgery and bank fraud. We wanted you to know before you read it in the newspaper." She kept silent for a few seconds. She didn't rejoice. She didn't cry either. "All right. Will they process him?" "He has the right to an attorney." She hung up. She stood looking at the crucifix on the wall. "Forgive him, Lord, but don't return him the same." Jessica, upon hearing, approached slowly. "Are you going to visit him?" "Not yet. Let him understand the weight of consequence. Not all punishment is cruelty." She opened the notebook and wrote with a firm hand, "Day 7. House protected. Michael detained. There's no revenge, there's order. The heart hurts, but it beats freely." That night, Eleanor cooked rice pudding for all the guests at the boarding house. Martha helped her serve. Jessica put flowers on the table. The air filled with soft laughter, with simple humanity. "And what's next, Eleanor?" She looked at the illuminated courtyard fireflies dancing among the potted plants. "To keep living without fear, without debt, without silence." The wind moved the curtains as if applauding. Monday's dawn arrived with the smell of wet earth. It had rained all night, and the streets of Oak Ridge shone like broken mirrors. Eleanor opened the window of her room at the boarding house and let the fresh air tousle her hair. She wasn't in a hurry. For the first time in many years, there was no one waiting for her to serve coffee or to ask for money. Silence was a luxury she was learning to savor. The mirror's reflection returned a different woman. The wrinkles were still there, yes, but they were no longer just marks of time. They were traveled paths, scars that told stories of resistance. She put on her floral scarf, the same one she had worn the day she left home, and smiled. This scarf no longer smelled of farewell, she thought. Now it smelled of beginning. That morning she went down to the common dining room where Martha was serving sweetbread and oatmeal. Jessica was there too, dressed in a simple blouse with her hair pulled back. "Good morning, mother-in-law." Eleanor looked at her with tenderness. "Don't call me that any more, dear. Not out of resentment, but because you deserve to start from your name." "Then good morning, Eleanor." They hugged without saying more. That embrace smelled of silent forgiveness, of complicity between women who had survived the same storm. Jessica had found work at a grocery store in the neighborhood. Eleanor helped her with accounts and keeping a notebook with expenses. Between them, they reconstructed a simple routine without big promises, but full of dignity. A few days later, Eleanor visited Pastor Jim. In the sacristy, the smell of incense and melted wax filled the air. "Pastor, I've come to ask something I don't know how to say." "Speak, daughter." "Can one forgive without reopening the door?" The pastor smiled. "Of course. Forgiving is not inviting the wolf back to the fold. It's releasing the poison so it doesn't kill you." Eleanor nodded, breathing slowly. "Then I've already done it." She left the church with a firm step. In front of the atrium, a municipal crew was sweeping wet leaves. She stopped for a moment to watch. "That's how I want to leave my soul," she thought, "swept but clean." At noon, Martha took her to the county's senior center where they were looking for volunteers for a new support program for elderly women. "It's just filling out forms, giving talks accompanying those who don't have family," she explained. Eleanor accepted without hesitation. "All my life I served in silence. Now I want to serve with purpose." In the office, a young social worker received her with a smile. "You have accounting experience, right? You could help us teach the ladies to manage their pension." "Of course, dear. I know what it's like to stretch a dollar until it sings." The work gave her meaning. Her days began to fill with new voices with stories similar to hers, women who had also been forgotten, who had raised ungrateful children who were now seeking to rediscover themselves. Eleanor listened more than she spoke, and in each outside story she found pieces of her own past, but now without pain. One afternoon she received a letter from Michael's attorney. She opened it with a serene heart. "Mrs. Patterson, your son Michael Patterson has accepted the charges and will begin a reparation process. He has requested to communicate with you. If you wish to authorize a visit, please notify us." Eleanor carefully folded the paper. She felt neither rage nor excessive compassion, just a melancholic peace. "I have nothing left to say to him," she thought. "But perhaps one day when he wants to listen, I'll have something to teach him." That night she wrote in her notebook, Day 12, "Michael asked to see me. I don't know if I'll go. Perhaps forgiveness also needs distance." She closed the notebook and looked at the ceiling. The fan turned slowly, marking a rhythm of calm. Outside, the song of crickets mingled with the laughter of guests. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of the past. One Sunday, while helping at the church, an older lady, Mrs. Olivia Baker, approached her with a trembling voice. "Eleanor, I heard your story. They say your son threw you out of the house and that you taught him a lesson without shouting." "Something like that," she replied, smiling. "I didn't have the courage. My son took my savings. He still lives with me. I don't know how to do what you did." Eleanor took her hands. "Start by believing you deserve better. When a woman stands her ground, the world adjusts, even if it takes time." The two cried slowly, like someone watering a plant. Days later, Pastor Jim proposed organizing a small support center in the house she had recovered. It could serve to shelter older women who need a temporary place. The city council could help with the paperwork. Eleanor thought for a few seconds. Yes, Pastor, let that house stop being the setting of pain and become a refuge. She signed the papers without hesitation. The process was quick. In less than a month, the sign on the facade said Patterson House Transitional Home for Women and Grandmothers in Reconstruction. The first day it opened, Eleanor placed flowers at the entrance and a small sign on the gate. "Here we don't serve orders, we serve hopes." Local news began to talk about the project. Some recognized her from the story, others for the help she offered, but the versions no longer mattered. Her name was now linked to something worth more, a place where dignity had a roof. Jessica visited on weekends. They cooked together, laughed, sometimes remembered the past without pain. Michael from the county jail began sending letters. Some asked for forgiveness. Others recounted childhood memories. Eleanor read them without rushing some. She answered others she kept stored between the pages of her notebook. Each night before sleeping, she looked at the crucifix on the wall and murmured, "Thank you, Lord, for returning my name to me." She was no longer Michael's mom or the poor lady thrown out. She was Eleanor Patterson, founder of her own rebirth. An autumn afternoon, while the sun painted the facade orange, a new guest arrived at the house, a white-haired woman with a small dog and a blue suitcase. Eleanor received her with the same phrase with which she had said goodbye to her son that day. "Come in here, no one leaves. We only start over." And in the hallway where once shouts had resonated, now there were laughter songs and prayers. Eleanor closed her eyes for an instant. The wind moved the curtains, and she understood that sometimes the miracle is not returning, but staying in peace. Sunday dawned with a gentle clarity, the kind that doesn't hurt the eyes, but washes them clean. At Patterson House, the air smelled of fresh coffee and toasted bread. The women staying at the shelter had placed a small radio by the window, and an old love song played as if time were walking barefoot through the hallway. Eleanor watered the bougainvillea in the courtyard, letting the water run slowly through the soil without hurry, like a blessing that no longer needed to be negotiated. On the door hung the sign she had written herself in the careful handwriting of a retired schoolteacher. "Here we don't serve orders, we serve hopes." Each time she read it, she felt that sweet knot in her throat that is neither crying nor laughing, but belonging. The house her house now belonged to pieced to reconstruction to the usefulness that ignites faith without the need for big words. "More coffee, Eleanor?" asked Diane, one of the new residents, her eyes swollen from old nights, but her voice firmer now. "Yes, dear. And put cinnamon in the pot. Cinnamon cures sorrows the doctor doesn't prescribe," Eleanor responded, winking. That day they were expecting visitors from the city council. They would come to see how they were doing with the support program and to deliver new mattresses. The women were busy sweeping, arranging sheets, giving shine to memories. Jessica arrived with a bag of bread tied on an apron and went into the kitchen as if she had been born for that place, mixing and laughing, softly fine-tuning the flavor with a pinch of salt and another of patience. Mid-morning, Eleanor's cell phone vibrated on the table. An unknown number, but with the now familiar area code of the county jail. Her heart gave a small jump, just a pigeon slip. She breathed deeply, looked at the sky through the window, and answered. "Hello? Mom?" The voice came hoarse, careful, as if walking on tiptoes inside. "It's me." Eleanor didn't say the name. She held it on her warm, thin tongue. Outside, someone laughed. Inside, silence arranged the chairs. "I'm listening, son." "I'm not calling to justify myself. There's no way." "I know." A throat clearing. And then that tone she once knew and had forgotten, that of the child who demands explanations from the world. "Sometimes I wake up thinking about Dad's armchair, about the smell of the living room when we played board games. Do you remember I would say king, and you would correct me? First the draw, then the victory. Mom, I failed. Not just you, I failed myself. I wanted you to know it from me and not from a paper." Eleanor rested her hand on the table. The wood was warm, alive. A door slammed in the hallway, and then hurried footsteps, but nothing interrupted that invisible thread. "Thank you for saying it," she responded. "I already knew. A mother's heart is like a well. What you throw in is heard from the bottom. I'm not asking you to come, I just wanted—" The voice broke into a splinter. "For you to forgive me." Eleanor closed her eyes. She saw, as in an old photo, the boy with scraped knees and baby teeth. She saw the arrogant young man who confused pride with manhood. She saw the man who lied out of fear and hunger for respect he never earned. And she saw the woman she was herself walking to the door with a suitcase the day she decided to live. You already have forgiveness, son, even before asking for it. But forgiveness doesn't open the door alone. Persistence in truth opens it. "Would you teach me?" he asked softly, as if the phone could bring his forehead to a lap. "I'm no one's teacher, barely a student of my own story. Start by paying what you owe by telling the truth, even if it cost you by learning to ask without demanding. When you get out, if you really need to learn to live differently, there will be coffee here. Not a bed or an excuse, but coffee to look into each other's eyes." There was silence on the other end, then a breath adjusting itself. "Thank you, Mom." He hung up. Eleanor put down the cell phone and allowed herself a minute of stillness. She didn't cry. She let the air make a hollow inside her like a freshly painted room. Jessica approached with a steaming cup and, without asking, placed her hand over hers. "Everything all right?" "Everything in its place, dear. The clocks now sound even." At noon, the city council delegation arrived, 2 young men with orange vests, a young female social worker with a folder in hand, and the head of the project's coordination, a gentleman with a mustache who smelled of barbershop lotion. They toured the house, took photos, marveled at what women with little budget and much faith could do in a few weeks. They promised to paint the facade and bring a couple of new fans. "There's something here that can't be bought," said the mustached man, looking at the sunny courtyard. "It smells of respect, and that's missing in many places." Eleanor smiled. Sometimes even politics knows how to speak a truth without disguising it. In the afternoon, the parish organized a small meeting in the annex hall. Cookies, fresh water, folding chairs, and testimonies. Pastor Jim spoke for 5 minutes, just enough, and then let the women tell their stories. Diane spoke of her fear of becoming invisible. Mrs. Olivia Baker spoke of her lost savings. Jessica spoke of the decision to be called by her name to start over. When it was Eleanor's turn, she stood with her floral scarf and the notebook against her chest. "I come to tell you that it's possible not because it doesn't hurt, but because it does." And one continues, "A mother's love is not a blank check or a chain. It's a house with doors and windows. It opens to affection, closes to humiliation. And when one closes the door to humiliation an entire courtyard opens for planting. Applause not thunderous, but the kind that warms. They returned to Patterson House with the light descending on the street like a golden rebozo. At the gate, Martha hung a garland of paper cutouts. The ladies put on soft music, and someone without permission began to sing, "You'll Know That I Love You." And yes, affection, when it's no longer a chain, sounds like cured spite, like a quiet promise. At nightfall, Eleanor went up to her room, opened the window, and stood watching the purple sky. She took out the notebook and wrote in round handwriting, "Day 40. The house sings. Michael called. The wound doesn't return, the voice does. I forgive and continue. If one day he returns different, there will be coffee. For today, the murmur of the bougainvillea and the laughter in the courtyard are enough for me." She closed the notebook. The room smelled of soap and wood. The fan marked a lullaby beat. Downstairs, the doorbell rang. It was a new woman with a knapsack and hope in her eyes. Eleanor descended the stairs, slowly took the doorknob, and opened. "Come in, dear. Here we don't judge the past. We accompany the journey." The woman smiled like someone who finally understands a language they always had in their mouth. Within 2 weeks, the story had spread far beyond Oak Ridge. Local papers covered the shelter, and a regional TV station had sent a reporter to do a feature on the grandmother who said no, as they called Eleanor. But alongside the positive coverage came the vicious rumors. Michael's friends, the ones who had joined him at poker nights and sports bars, began their own whisper campaign. "She's lost it. Dementia. Last week she was downtown talking to a lamppost. Know why she really left caught her stealing from her son's wallet. He's too good-hearted to press charges. That shelter thing tax scam, she's pocketing the donations." The poison found its way into the town's bloodstream. Eleanor felt it when she entered the pharmacy and the young clerk suddenly avoided eye contact. She noticed when Mrs. Henley at the post office handed her mail with a studied politeness that hadn't been there before. "Eleanor, we need to address this," Sarah Goldstein said during their weekly meeting. "These rumors could affect your custody of the house and the shelter's license. What do you suggest?" "Medical evaluation. Get it on record that you're of sound mind. Then we file a defamation suit." "Against my own son." Sarah removed her glasses, polishing them slowly. "At this point, Eleanor, either you defend yourself legally or you'll lose what you've built." Eleanor looked out the window of the law office. The maple trees were beginning to show hints of gold at their tips. "Prepare the paperwork," she said finally, "but we'll use it only if necessary." That evening, Jessica arrived at Patterson House with reddened eyes. "They fired me," she said as soon as Eleanor opened the door. "The store owner said they don't need the drama, said customers were complaining." Eleanor led her to the kitchen where the smell of cinnamon tea filled the air. She poured 2 cups without speaking. "It's Michael," Jessica continued. "He's having his friends call businesses where I apply, telling them I stole from our house before leaving." Eleanor's hand tightened around the warm mug. "Are there records of these calls?" "The cafe on Maple Street recorded one. The manager is my friend Tina. Tomorrow we visit Sarah. This stops now." Jessica looked up, surprise crossing her tired face. "You're going to fight back." Eleanor smiled a smile that carried all the quiet determination of her 70 years. "Dear, there comes a time when turning the other cheek just gives them a better angle to slap you. We're not seeking revenge, we're seeking boundaries." The courthouse of Oak Ridge County was an imposing red brick building with tall windows that caught the morning light. Eleanor sat on a bench in the corridor, her back straight, despite the nerves dancing in her stomach. Jessica sat beside her, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "Case number 247, Patterson v. Patterson defamation hearing," called a clerk from an open door. Sarah Goldstein nodded to them both. "Remember, just state the facts. No emotion." Inside Judge Reynolds, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes looked over her glasses at the assembled parties. On the opposite side sat Michael's court-appointed attorney, a young man who looked barely out of law school. "Where is the defendant?" the judge asked. "Still in county holding your honor," the young attorney replied. "He's waived his right to appear for this hearing." Eleanor felt a pang. Even now, Michael couldn't face her. The proceedings moved quickly. Sarah presented the recorded calls affidavits from 3 businesses that had received defamatory information, and Eleanor's full medical evaluation showing no cognitive impairment. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Sarah concluded, We have evidence that Mr. Patterson has orchestrated a campaign to have Ms. Jessica Patterson fired from employment opportunities constituting economic sabotage. Judge Reynolds removed her glasses, fixing Michael's attorney with a stern gaze. Does your client understand that these actions may constitute additional charges that could extend his current sentence? The young man shifted uncomfortably. We're prepared to offer a settlement, Your Honor. Full retraction of all statements and a written apology. Ms. Patterson, the judge turned to Eleanor. Is this acceptable to you? Eleanor rose slowly. Yes, Your Honor, with one addition. I want a restraining order. Not because I fear my son physically, but because healing needs distance. The judge nodded. Granted. The defendant will cease all communication directly or through third parties, except through court-approved channels. She struck her gavel once. So ordered. Outside in the autumn sun, Eleanor took a deep breath. The air smelled of fallen leaves and new beginnings. Are you okay? Jessica asked. I am. It's strange I feel lighter, not heavier, as if I've set down a burden I didn't know I was carrying. Sarah joined them, tucking files into her briefcase. That's the thing about proper boundaries, Eleanor. They don't just keep others out. They give you room to expand within. October turned to November, bringing with it early frosts that painted the lawn of Patterson House with silver each morning. The shelter had grown to house 6 women each with her own story of sacrifice and awakening. Eleanor developed a routine. Mornings were for administrative work, grant applications, bill payments, meeting with social workers. Afternoons were for teaching the residents practical skills from basic accounting to how to navigate Social Security benefits. Evenings were for community-shared meals, stories, sometimes tears, often laughter. Jessica had found work at the local library, a blessing that came through Pastor Jim's connections. She had moved into a small apartment, but spent most evenings at Patterson House, helping with dinner and staying for the impromptu singing sessions that often erupted around the old piano in the living room. Ms. Eleanor, called Diane one morning. There's mail from the courthouse. Eleanor opened the thick envelope with steady hands. Inside were court documents and a letter in an unfamiliar handwriting. Mom, it began. As ordered by the court, I am writing to formally retract the statements made about you and Jessica. But I want you to know this isn't just a legal requirement for me. I've had time to think here, and I'm starting to understand what you meant about truth. I'm working with a counselor on my gambling addiction. It started small after Dad died, just poker nights with friends. Then online betting. By the time I realized how deep I was, I owed people who don't take excuses for payment. I was scared. But that's no excuse for what I tried to do to you. You deserved better. You always deserved better. Michael. Eleanor sat in the rocking chair by the window, letter in hand, watching the birds gather at the feeder she had installed last week. She didn't cry, but her chest felt both hollow and full, like a bell that had been struck but was still vibrating with sound. She called Sarah Goldstein. Is this letter part of his plea deal? She asked without preamble. The retraction is, Sarah replied, but the personal content isn't required. That appears to be genuine, Eleanor. I see, and when is his sentencing? Next Wednesday. The DA is pushing for 18 months, but with good behavior and the reparation program, he could be out in 10. Eleanor thanked her and hung up. She sat with the knowledge turning it over like a stone in her hand, feeling its weight and contours. That evening, she shared the news with Jessica over tea. Will you go to the sentencing? Jessica asked, stirring honey into her cup. No, Eleanor said. That chapter needs to close without my presence. What matters now is what comes after, not the punishment itself. Jessica nodded, understanding in her eyes. He's writing to me, too, asking for divorce papers. And will you file? Already have. Sarah is handling it. She looked up, a small smile playing at her lips. I'm taking back my maiden name, Bennett. Jessica Bennett. It sounds like me again. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed her hand. It sounds perfect. The city council grant came through in early December, just as the first light snow dusted Oak Ridge. The funds would allow Patterson House to expand, converting the detached garage into a community room for workshops and counseling sessions. Eleanor called a meeting with all the residents and volunteers. They gathered in the living room where a small Christmas tree twinkled with lights that Martha had donated. This isn't just my house anymore, Eleanor told them, standing by the fireplace. It's ours, and with this grant we need to decide together how to grow. The women, once silent and withdrawn, now spoke with confidence, suggesting programs offering skills, debating priorities. Eleanor watched her heart full. This was what rebuilding looked like, not just walls and roofs, but voices and dreams. After everyone had gone to bed, Eleanor sat at the small desk in her room, opened her notebook, and wrote, Day 74. The grant was approved. The women are planning dreaming. Michael will be sentenced next week. The letter he sent seems genuine, but healing takes more than words on paper. Jessica is becoming Jessica again. I am becoming something new. Not just a mother, not just a shelter founder. Perhaps just Eleanor at last. She looked at the photograph of Robert on her nightstand. You would be proud, she whispered to the empty room. Not of what happened, but of what's growing from it. The following Monday, Sarah Goldstein appeared at Patterson House with an unexpected visitor, Frank Davis, from the bank. We have news, Sarah said as they settled in Eleanor's small office. The bank has finished its investigation into the attempted fraud. Frank opened his briefcase. Eleanor Michael wasn't acting alone. We've found evidence that his supervisor at work, Gregory Phillips, was involved. In fact, it appears Greg was the mastermind using Michael's gambling debts as leverage to get him to attempt the property fraud. Eleanor felt the room tilt slightly. Gregory? But he's been Robert's friend for years. He came to our anniversary party last year. That's what made him dangerous, Sarah interjected. He knew your family dynamics, your financial situation. He's been involved in 3 other cases we've uncovered, all targeting older women with property assets. The DA wants to know if you'll testify, Frank said. Not against Michael, his case is separate, but against Phillips. Your testimony could help put away someone who's been preying on vulnerable seniors for years. Eleanor looked out the window at the snow-covered yard where Diane and Mrs. Baker were filling bird feeders, laughing as chickadees darted around them. I'll do it, she said finally. Not for revenge, but because no one else should go through this. The week before Christmas, Oak Ridge received a heavy snowfall that transformed the town into a postcard-perfect winter scene. Patterson House stood warm and bright against the white landscape, its windows glowing with colored lights, the sound of carols drifting into the street. Inside, the women were preparing for their first holiday celebration. The aroma of gingerbread and pine needles filled every room. Handmade decorations hung from doorways, paper snowflakes, popcorn strings, ornaments crafted in the evening workshops. Eleanor was in the kitchen teaching Mrs. Baker and Jessica how to make her famous yeast rolls when Martha burst through the door, snow melting on her coat. Eleanor, come quickly, it's the news. They hurried to the living room where the small television was turned to the local station. On screen, a reporter stood in front of the Oak Ridge Bank microphone in hand. Breaking news today as police have arrested Gregory Phillips, senior loan officer, on multiple charges of fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. According to court documents, Phillips targeted senior homeowners throughout the county in an elaborate scheme to seize their properties through fraudulent loans. The investigation began when one victim, Eleanor Patterson, discovered an attempt to forge her signature on loan documents. The women of Patterson House erupted in cheers. Jessica hugged Eleanor tightly, flour from her hands, leaving white prints on Eleanor's sweater. You did it, she whispered. You stopped him. Eleanor shook her head, her eyes fixed on the screen where they were now showing Phillips being led to a police car in handcuffs. We all did it. Every woman who ever stood her ground did it. Later that evening, as the house settled into quiet, the doorbell rang. Eleanor opened the door to find Officer Brennan standing on the porch snow, dusting his shoulders. Mrs. Patterson, I thought you should know personally. Michael's sentencing was this morning. 12 months with eligibility for the county's rehabilitation program after 6. Eleanor nodded, her breath clouding in the cold air. Thank you for telling me. There's more. He shifted, uncomfortable. We found evidence on Philip's computer that he had plans to break into your house next week, Christmas Eve, to retrieve the original property deeds. Michael refused to participate. That's actually what broke the case open. Eleanor felt her knees weaken slightly. She gripped the doorframe. Michael refused. Yes, ma'am. He told his cellmate who reported it. Said he wouldn't let his mother be hurt no matter what they threatened him with. Officer Brennan handed her an envelope. He asked me to give you this. It's been checked. There's nothing inappropriate. Just a letter. Eleanor took it, feeling its weight in her palm. Thank you, officer. Would you like to come in for coffee? It's bitter cold out there. Another time, ma'am. I've got 3 more stops tonight. After he left, Eleanor sat in the rocking chair by the Christmas tree, the unopened letter in her lap. She could hear the women in the kitchen washing dishes, their laughter rising and falling like music. Finally, she opened the envelope. "Mom," Michael had written in his familiar, cramped handwriting. "By the time you read this, you'll probably have heard about Greg Phillips. I'm sorry I got mixed up with him. I'm sorry for everything. I know words are cheap now, especially from me. But I want you to know I'm working the program here. I'm facing what I did. Officer Brennan says you've turned the house into a shelter for women. Dad would be so proud of you. I hope someday I can make you both proud again, too. I don't expect forgiveness or even a reply. I just wanted you to know I'm trying." Michael. Eleanor folded the letter carefully and placed it in her notebook. She didn't write anything that night. Instead, she joined the women in the kitchen, helped them finish the dishes, and listened to their stories of Christmases past and hopes for the future. That night, as snow continued to fall, blanketing Oak Ridge in silence, Eleanor stood at her bedroom window. The streetlight cast a golden glow on the untouched white covering the front yard. In the distance, church bells rang, marking midnight. She thought of Michael in his cell, of Jessica finding her name again, of the women sleeping safely under this roof. She thought of Robert, who had taught her that a house was more than walls and windows, it was love made visible. Eleanor didn't know what forgiveness would look like in the months to come. She didn't know if reconciliation was possible or even wise. But she knew with a certainty that settled in her bones like peace that she had found her own path. Not as someone's mother or wife, but as Eleanor Patterson, a woman who had faced the storm and found within herself an unshakable shelter. She wrote in her notebook one line before sleep, "Day 87, the truth has come to light. Michael chose right finally. The women are safe. Tomorrow we bake cookies. Life continues one small miracle at a time." January arrived with a bitter cold that froze the window panes of Patterson House into delicate crystal patterns. Eleanor would wake early each morning to light the old furnace before the women rose, watching her breath cloud in the dim light of dawn. These quiet moments had become precious to her, a time to gather her thoughts before the day's demands began. On the first Monday of the new year, Sarah Goldstein called with news that the court had officially cleared all ownership disputes regarding Eleanor's property. "It's done," Sarah said, the satisfaction evident in her voice. "The house is legally protected as your sole property with additional security provisions due to the fraud attempt. No one can touch it without going through multiple verification procedures." "Thank you, Sarah," Eleanor replied, watching snowflakes drift past her window. "What about the nonprofit status for the shelter?" "We've filed all the paperwork. It typically takes 3 to 6 months, but given the community support and the publicity from the Phillips case, I'm hoping we might expedite it." After hanging up, Eleanor stood in the center of her bedroom, feeling a curious sensation, as if the walls around her were both familiar and entirely new. This house, built with Robert's hands and paid for with decades of their shared sacrifice, had transformed from a battleground into something sacred. Not a temple or a fortress, but a crossroads where wounded women could find their way back to themselves. She descended the stairs to find Jessica and Martha laying out fabric swatches on the dining room table. "We thought the community room could use some color," Jessica explained, her eyes bright with purpose. "The beige walls make it feel too institutional." "What do you think of this blue?" Martha held up a sample the color of summer skies. "Reminds me of hope." Eleanor touched the fabric, remembering the curtains she had sewn when she and Robert first moved in. How proud she'd been of their little starter home. "It's perfect." Later that afternoon, Pastor Jim arrived with architectural plans tucked under his arm. His gray beard was flecked with snow, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. "The men's group at church wants to help with the garage conversion," he announced, spreading the drawings across the kitchen table. "Brother Thomas is a retired contractor. Says he can get donations for most of the materials." Eleanor poured him coffee while studying the plans. The simple garage would become a meeting space with large windows, a small kitchenette, and a counseling office. "It's more than I imagined." That's the thing about community, Eleanor. When you plant one seed of goodness, others want to nurture it too. As January progressed, Patterson House hummed with activity. Volunteers arrived on weekends, church members, high school students, even some of Frank Davis's colleagues from the bank painting walls, installing insulation, building wheelchair-accessible ramps. The project had taken on a life of its own, growing beyond Eleanor's initial vision. One afternoon, while supervising the installation of new energy-efficient windows, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor. Gloria Phillips Gregory's wife stood on the front porch, her thin frame tense with apprehension. I'm sorry to come unannounced, she began, her voice barely audible above the sounds of construction. I needed to see you face to face. Eleanor invited her inside, away from curious eyes. In the quiet of the study, Gloria's composure cracked. I didn't know, she whispered, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. All these years I thought we were comfortable because he was good at his job. I never questioned where the extra money came from. Eleanor watched her carefully. The woman before her was another victim, her life upended by her husband's crimes. What will you do now? Gloria straightened her shoulders. Start over. I've sold the house to help pay restitution to the victims. I'm moving in with my sister in Toledo next week. And Gregory? He'll serve his time. After that, she shook her head. I don't know. 28 years of marriage, and I never really knew him. Eleanor felt a flicker of recognition in those words, the same bewilderment she had experienced with Michael. How could you live with someone, love them, and still miss the darkness growing inside them? Would you like to see what we're building here? Eleanor asked, surprising herself with the offer. She showed Gloria through the house, introducing her to the residents, explaining their programs. By the time they reached the garden where Mrs. Baker was planting winter kale in raised beds, Gloria's eyes had softened. You've created something beautiful from something terrible, she said. Not just me, Eleanor replied. All of us together. As Gloria prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. Can I ask you something personal? How did you find the strength to not hate, to build rather than burn? Eleanor considered the question, watching the construction crew measure boards for the new porch railing. I realized that hate requires constant feeding, and I was tired of serving meals to things that diminished me. After Gloria left, Eleanor found Jessica in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. That was brave, Jessica said, not looking up from her task. What was showing kindness to the wife of the man who tried to steal everything from you? Eleanor smiled, taking a knife to help with the preparations. There's a difference between being kind and being a doormat. I've learned that one can have boundaries and compassion simultaneously. That night, after the house had settled into sleep, Eleanor sat at her desk reviewing the nonprofit application forms. The legal language was dense, the requirements extensive. Creating Patterson House as an official entity involved more than goodwill and determination. It required navigating a labyrinth of regulations, insurance requirements, and financial projections. She rubbed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about providing beds and meals. It was about creating sustainable support for women reclaiming their lives. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Diane, clutching a steaming mug of tea. Thought you might need this, she said, placing the tea on the desk. You've been at those papers for hours. Eleanor stretched her stiff shoulders. There's so much to consider. What if I'm not qualified to run a proper shelter? What if we can't sustain the funding? Diane sat on the edge of the bed, her face solemn in the lamplight. Before I came here, I lived in my car for 3 months. My son had gambled away my retirement and convinced the family I was senile when I confronted him. No proper shelter would take me because I didn't fit their criteria, not homeless enough, not abused enough, not young enough. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. You gave me dignity, Eleanor. Not charity dignity. That's what makes this place different. After Diane left, Eleanor opened her notebook and wrote Day 96. The nonprofit paperwork is overwhelming, but the purpose is clear. Today, Gloria Phillips visited another woman starting over in her 60s. I wonder how many of us there are facing the second half of life with plans suddenly rewritten. The garage will become a community room by spring. The seeds in Olivia's garden are already pushing through the cold earth. Life insists on continuing on growing. Who am I to do any less? February brought a thaw, turning the snow to slush and revealing the first tentative shoots of crocuses in the front yard. The construction of the community room was nearing completion, with only finishing touches remaining. Eleanor had established a weekly routine at Patterson House. Mondays were for administrative tasks, reviewing budgets, coordinating with social services, answering the increasingly frequent emails from other communities interested in their model. Tuesdays and Thursdays were for educational workshops where residents learned everything from digital literacy to navigating health insurance options. Wednesdays were for individual counseling sessions with a retired therapist who volunteered her services. Weekends were for community-shared meals, crafts, occasional outings to local events. What had begun as emergency shelter had evolved into a comprehensive support system for women in transition. On a mild Thursday afternoon, while Eleanor was teaching a workshop on financial literacy, Frank Davis arrived with unexpected news. The bank's Community Reinvestment Committee has voted to establish a dedicated fund for Patterson House, he announced, handing her a formal letter. It's part of our reparations for the Phillips situation. $100,000, Eleanor, with an additional $25,000 annually for the next 5 years. The women around the table gasped. Eleanor read the letter twice, her hands trembling slightly. This changes everything, she whispered. You've earned it, Frank replied. Your courage in testifying against Phillips protected countless others. The bank wants to acknowledge that. That evening, Eleanor called an all-house meeting. The women gathered in the newly completed community room, its blue walls brightened by artwork they had created together in weekend workshops. With this funding, Eleanor explained, we can expand our services, hire part-time staff, establish an emergency transportation fund, even offer small grants to help women secure their own housing eventually. Jessica, who had been managing the shelter's modest accounts, projected a budget outline on the wall. We need to think strategically, she said, her newfound confidence evident in her posture and voice. Create sustainable systems, not just immediate relief. Eleanor watched her with quiet pride. The frightened young woman who had fled her marriage months ago had blossomed into a capable administrator with natural leadership abilities. As the women discussed possibilities, suggesting programs and priorities, Eleanor felt a profound shift within herself. She was no longer just a mother who had lost her son to his demons, nor just a woman who had reclaimed her home. She had become something she never anticipated, a founder, a visionary, a builder of community. Later that night, alone in her room, she called Sarah Goldstein. The bank funding changes our nonprofit application, she said without preamble. We need to update the financial projections. I'll adjust the paperwork, Sarah replied. But Eleanor, there's something else we should discuss. With this level of funding and responsibility, you should consider creating a proper board of directors. I've been thinking about that too, Eleanor admitted. Martha has nonprofit experience from her church work. Jessica has proven herself with the accounts. Pastor Jim brings community connections. Frank understands the financial aspects. And you, Sarah asked, what role do you see for yourself? Eleanor paused, looking at the photograph of Robert on her nightstand. What would he think of her now, steering this unexpected ship? I'll be the executive director, she said finally, the title feeling both foreign and right on her tongue. At least until we can find someone younger with proper qualifications. Sarah's laugh was warm through the phone. Eleanor Patterson, when will you recognize that you are precisely the qualified person this organization needs? You've lived its mission. No degree can substitute for that wisdom. After they hung up, Eleanor opened her window despite the February chill. The night air carried the scent of thawing earth and wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded long and mournful, yet somehow hopeful in its journey forward. She wrote in her notebook, Day 127, the bank has provided funding beyond my wildest hopes. Patterson House will become official sustainable. I find myself planning years ahead when months ago I could barely see through the next day. Is this what Robert felt when he built this house? This sense of creating something that might outlive you? Jessica shines in her new role. The women are healing, growing. Even I am changing in ways I couldn't have imagined. Mother-wife survivor founder. Labels shapeshift, but the essence remains. I am still Eleanor, just more fully so. March arrived with fierce winds and sudden brilliant sunshine. The maple trees along Patterson House's driveway dripped with sap, which Pastor Jim collected in buckets to make syrup for the shelter's pancake breakfast fundraiser. The nonprofit paperwork had been filed, the board of directors established with Eleanor as executive director, Martha as program coordinator, Jessica as financial manager, Pastor Jim as community liaison, and Frank Davis as treasurer. They met weekly around the dining room table, planning the shelter's future with a blend of caution and ambition. We've received 3 new applications this week, Martha reported during one such meeting, passing around folders. All women over 60, all dealing with financial exploitation by family members. Eleanor reviewed the cases, recognizing the patterns: sons or grandsons with addiction issues, daughters-in-law who resented their presence, trusted financial advisors who had betrayed them. The stories echoed her own experience, but each woman's circumstances carried unique complications and pain. We only have 2 beds available, she noted. We could convert the sunroom, Jessica suggested. Add dividers for privacy, 2 more twin beds. That's a temporary solution, Frank cautioned. We need to think bigger. Pastor Jim leaned forward, his weathered hands folded on the table. The Methodist Church on Elm Street is closing. Congregation's too small to maintain it. The building has a fellowship hall kitchen, several classrooms. It's being listed next month. The room fell silent as they absorbed the implication. That's ambitious, Eleanor said finally. It's visionary, Martha countered. With the bank funding as seed money, we could launch a capital campaign. The Phillips case brought attention to elder financial abuse. People want to help. The discussion continued into the evening, possibilities expanding and contracting like a living thing. By the time they adjourned, a plan was taking shape, not just for additional beds, but for a comprehensive center serving vulnerable older women throughout the county. As the others departed, Jessica lingered, helping Eleanor collect the coffee cups and meeting notes. Are you okay with all this? She asked. It's growing beyond what you originally intended. Eleanor considered the question, thinking back to that October evening when she had walked out of her son's house with nothing but a suitcase and determination. I never intended any of this, she admitted. I just wanted my dignity back. But now you're changing lives, Jessica finished, mine included. Later that week, Eleanor led her first community workshop outside Patterson House. The Oak Ridge Senior Center had invited her to speak about financial safety for older adults. 20 women and a few men sat in folding chairs, watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to unmistakable recognition. Financial abuse doesn't always look like a stranger's scam. Eleanor began, her voice steadier than her nerves. Sometimes it wears the face of someone you love, someone you raised or trusted. That makes it harder to recognize, harder to fight, and infinitely more painful to recover from. She shared her story without embellishment or self-pity, explaining the warning signs she had missed, the boundaries she hadn't set, the red flags she had explained away out of maternal love. When I finally stood up for myself, I lost a relationship but regained my life, she concluded. And in doing so, I found a community of women with similar experiences. We are not alone, and we are not powerless. During the question period that followed, a slender woman with silver hair, styled in an elegant bob, raised her hand. I'm Barbara Collins, she introduced herself. My daughter and son-in-law moved in temporarily 3 years ago. Now they're pressuring me to add my son-in-law to my bank accounts to help manage my finances. I've resisted, but they're making me feel paranoid and ungrateful. Eleanor recognized the manipulation tactics immediately. Trust your instincts, Barbara. Financial management assistance doesn't require adding someone to your accounts. There are legal protections you can establish that maintain your control while allowing limited oversight. After the session ended, Barbara approached Eleanor privately. I don't think I can go home, she confessed, her composed exterior cracking. Yesterday I found my son-in-law at my computer accessing my investment accounts. When I confronted him, he became verbally abusive. By sunset, Barbara Collins had become Patterson House's newest resident, arriving with 2 carefully packed suitcases and decades of financial records she refused to leave behind. I've worked since I was 16, she explained as Eleanor helped her settle into the converted sunroom. Built a career in hospital administration, save diligently planned for a secure retirement. I'll be damned if I let them take that from me. Eleanor recognized in Barbara a kindred spirit, a woman who had played by the rules, built a respectable life, only to find herself vulnerable in what should have been her secure golden years. As March turned to April, Patterson House's reputation grew. Women came from neighboring counties, referred by social workers, church groups, and increasingly by other residents. Each arrival brought her own story, her own wounds, and her own strengths. There was Susan Delgado, a retired school teacher whose grandson had convinced her to co-sign loans for a business that existed only on paper. There was Diane Miller, whose late husband's children from his first marriage had contested his will, freezing her access to their shared assets. There was Helen Washington, a widow whose pastor had persuaded her to invest her life insurance payout in a faith-based scheme that had collapsed. Each woman found at Patterson House not just shelter, but community, other women who understood without judgment, who offered practical advice from their own experiences, who saw value in the decades of wisdom they carried. Eleanor established support groups, bringing in experts to address specific needs, a legal aid attorney to discuss estate planning, a financial advisor specializing in recovery from exploitation, a therapist focused on rebuilding self-trust after betrayal. But the most powerful healing came from the women themselves in evening conversations around the dining table or weekend gardening sessions in the expanding vegetable plots behind the house. They shared strategies, validated each other's anger, celebrated small victories, and gradually reclaimed their sense of agency. One rainy afternoon, as Eleanor helped Barbara organize her financial documents for an upcoming court case against her son-in-law, she received a call from Sarah Goldstein. "It's official," Sarah announced. "The IRS has approved your 501c3 status. Patterson House is now a recognized nonprofit organization." Eleanor sat down suddenly, overwhelmed by the journey from that October evening to this moment. "I never imagined this," she said softly. "The best things rarely come from our careful plans," Sarah replied. "They emerge from how we respond to the unexpected." That evening, despite the spring rain, the women of Patterson House gathered on the covered porch for an impromptu celebration. Martha brought sparkling cider. Jessica baked a cake decorated with the house's new logo, a simple outline of a Victorian home with an open door. As they raised their glasses in toast, Eleanor looked at the circle of faces illuminated by porch lights and candles. These women had arrived broken, but were healing each other through shared strength. They had created something precious and rare, a community of second beginnings. Later, in the quiet of her room, Eleanor wrote in her notebook, "Day 186. We are official now, a real nonprofit with a mission statement, bylaws, and tax-exempt status." The words on paper attempt to capture what happens here, but they fall short. How do you document the moment when a woman who believed herself worthless discovers her own value again? How do you quantify the courage it takes to start over after 60? Barbara won her temporary restraining order today. Susan has begun teaching financial literacy at the high school. Diane is designing our new website. We are no longer just surviving. We are creating. Michael has been in prison for 5 months now. I wonder if he's finding his way toward his own second beginning. I still wake sometimes with that hollow ache, the mother pain that never fully subsides. But it no longer defines my days. I am more than what I lost. We all are. Summer arrived with spectacular thunderstorms and humid nights that left the windows of Patterson House open to catch any stray breeze. The garden flourished under Olivia Baker's careful tending, producing more vegetables than the residents could consume. On Saturday mornings, they set up a small stand at the farmers' market selling excess produce to raise funds for the shelter. Eleanor had settled into a rhythm that balanced administrative responsibilities with personal connections. Each morning, she met with new residents, assessing their needs and helping them develop individualized plans for recovery and independence. Afternoons were often spent in meetings with community partners or potential donors. But she reserved evenings for the Heart of Patterson House communal dinners, support groups, or simply sitting on the porch with the women, listening to their stories and sharing her own. In late July, after Patterson House had been operating officially for 3 months, Eleanor received a letter from the prison chaplain. "Dear Mrs. Patterson," it read, "I am writing at the request of your son Michael. He has been participating in our restorative justice program and has expressed a desire to make amends with those he has harmed, beginning with you. This process is entirely voluntary, and you are under no obligation to respond. If you are interested in learning more about the possibility of a facilitated meeting, please contact me at the number below. Respectfully, Chaplain Thomas Wilson." Eleanor placed the letter on her desk and walked to the window. Outside, Jessica was teaching Barbara how to use a new tablet computer, both of them laughing at some shared joke. The summer light filtered through the maple trees, casting dappled shadows across the lawn. 14 months had passed since that October evening when Michael had delivered his ultimatum. In that time, Eleanor had rebuilt her life, created a community, and helped dozens of women reclaim their independence. She had testified against Gregory Phillips, protected her assets, and established a foundation for her future. She had healed in all the ways that mattered. But the mother wound remained that tender, complicated space where love and hurt intertwined like roots of the same tree. That evening, she called Martha for advice. "I've been invited to meet with Michael at the prison," she explained. "Part of a restorative justice program." Martha was silent for a moment. "Do you want to see him?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "Part of me does. Another part worries it will undo the healing I've accomplished." Healing isn't a finish line, Ellie. It's a process. Sometimes it means protecting yourself from those who hurt you. Other times it means cautiously rebuilding bridges with proper supports in place. Eleanor thought about the women at Patterson House, each navigating her own path with family members who had betrayed their trust. Some had chosen complete separation. Others had established carefully bounded relationships with adult children or siblings who had demonstrated genuine change. "I think I need to see him," she said finally. "Not for his sake, but for my own completion." The following week, Eleanor drove to the county correctional facility, a low beige building surrounded by chain-link fence and carefully landscaped grounds. She had dressed with particular care, a blue linen dress, pearl earrings, a touch of lipstick, armor of a sort reminding herself of who she had become. The visitor's room was stark but clean, with small tables bolted to the floor and plastic chairs. Chaplain Wilson, a tall man with kind eyes, met her at the entrance. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Patterson," he said, leading her to a private meeting room. "I'll be present throughout the conversation, but my role is primarily as a witness and facilitator if needed." Eleanor nodded, her throat suddenly dry. She sat at the table, placed her purse carefully beside her, and folded her hands to still their slight trembling. When Michael entered, Eleanor's first thought was how much weight he had lost. His prison uniform hung loosely on his frame, and his face had a gauntness that reminded her painfully of Robert in his final illness. But his eyes were clear, lacking the furtive quality she had grown accustomed to in his last months at home. "Mom," he said, his voice catching. "Michael." She didn't rise to embrace him, but she nodded toward the chair across from her. "Please sit." He sat carefully as if the chair might break beneath him, his hands resting awkwardly on the table. "Thank you for coming," he began. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," she replied honestly. Chaplain Wilson spoke gently from his position near the door. "Michael, perhaps you could share what you've prepared as we discussed." Michael nodded, took a deep breath, and met his mother's gaze directly. "Mom, I've spent months thinking about what I did to you, not just the fraud attempt, but the years before. How I took advantage of your love, your generosity, your trust. I convinced myself it was normal that you owed me support because you were my mother. I used your sense of obligation to extract money housing endless second chances." He paused, swallowing hard. "The gambling started after Dad died. Just poker nights with friends at first, then online betting. It gave me a rush, made me feel alive when everything else felt gray. By the time I realized I was addicted, I owed serious money to people who don't take excuses." Eleanor listened without interrupting, her face composed despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "When Greg Phillips approached me about the loan scheme, I knew it was wrong. But I justified it, told myself you wouldn't really be hurt, that the house was just sitting there, that I'd pay everything back once I got back on my feet. I lied to Jessica, to you, to myself." He looked down at his hands. "I've been working with a counselor here, attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. For the first time, I'm facing what I've done without excuses. I don't expect forgiveness, Mom. I don't even expect you to want me in your life again. But I needed you to know that I understand now. I see the pain I caused, and I'm truly deeply sorry." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of a door closing somewhere in the facility. Eleanor studied her son's face, the familiar features that echoed Robert's, the unfamiliar humility in his expression. "May I ask you something, Michael?" He nodded. "That night when you gave me the ultimatum, serve Jessica or leave, what were you really trying to accomplish?" Michael flinched visibly. "I was trying to control you," he admitted. "I knew you were getting suspicious about money disappearing. Jessica had started questioning expenses. I thought if I could isolate you, make you feel dependent on my approval, you'd be easier to manipulate." The raw truth of it hung in the air between them. "Thank you for your honesty," Eleanor said quietly. "It must be difficult to face that in yourself." "It's the hardest thing I've ever done," he agreed. "Harder than detox, harder than the shame of arrest. Looking at who I really became, it's brutal." Eleanor nodded, understanding perhaps better than he realized the courage required to face one's true self without flinching. "I've built something from what happened," she said, shifting the conversation. "A shelter for women like me, older, taken advantage of by families starting over. It's called Patterson House now." Something like pride flickered across Michael's face. "The officer who arrested me mentioned it. Said you were helping a lot of people." "It's helping me too," she acknowledged, giving purpose to the pain. They talked for nearly an hour, carefully navigating the landscape of their shared past and separate presents. Michael told her about his counseling work, his plans for rehabilitation, his hopes to find employment, helping others with addiction after his release. Eleanor shared stories of Patterson House of the women finding their strength of the community that had formed around their shared healing. As their time drew to a close, Chaplain Wilson gently intervened. "Michael, is there anything else you wanted to address today?" Michael hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small folded paper. "I wrote something if it's okay to read it." Eleanor nodded. "Mom, I can't undo what I've done. I can't restore the trust I broke or erase the pain I caused. What I can do is commit to being different, to continuing this work of recovery and amends for the rest of my life. I don't ask for a place in your home or your daily life. That's not for me to determine. But I want you to know that whatever relationship you're willing to have, even if it's just knowing that I'm doing better from a distance, I'm grateful for it." He refolded the paper with hands that trembled slightly. "That's all." Eleanor felt tears press against her eyelids, but she didn't let them fall. This moment required clarity, not emotion clouding her judgment. "Michael, I forgive you," she said, her voice steady. "Not because what you did wasn't serious, but because carrying anger serves neither of us. I forgive you because it frees me, not because it erases consequences." Relief washed across his face, followed immediately by careful restraint. "Thank you. As for our future relationship," she continued, "I can't predict that today. When you're released, if you continue on this path of recovery and responsibility, we can explore what's possible. But there will always be boundaries, now clear, non-negotiable boundaries that protect both of us." "I understand," he said quietly. "That's more than fair." When it was time to leave, Eleanor didn't embrace him. Instead, she extended her hand across the table. Michael took it gently, as if holding something infinitely precious and fragile. "Goodbye for now, Michael." "Goodbye, Mom. Thank you for coming." The drive back to Patterson House was silent, except for the classical music playing softly on the radio. Eleanor felt emotionally drained, yet somehow lighter, as if a burden she had carried for months had been set down, not abandoned, but no longer pressing into her shoulders with each step. At home, she found Jessica waiting on the porch swing, concern evident in her face. "How did it go?" she asked as Eleanor settled beside her. "Better than I feared, not as simple as I hoped," Eleanor replied. "He's doing the work, Jessica. Really doing it." Jessica nodded, her expression thoughtful. "People can change. I have." "We all have," Eleanor agreed. That night she wrote in her notebook, Day 247, "I saw Michael today. The prison has aged him, or perhaps it's the weight of recognition, seeing himself clearly for the first time. There's a humility in him now that reminds me of Robert, after he overcame his own demons with alcohol in those early years of our marriage. I don't know what our relationship will become. The son I raised is gone. This new Michael is someone I'm just beginning to know. The strangest part was realizing that I am different too. The woman who would have done anything to keep peace, who confused self-sacrifice with love, she's gone as well. We are strangers finding our way towards something new. Not the easy intimacy of before, but perhaps something more honest." I told him about Patterson House. For the first time in our adult relationship, I saw genuine pride in his eyes, not for what he had accomplished, but for me. It felt like the first brick in whatever bridge we might someday build between us. Autumn returned to Oak Ridge, painting the maple trees in fiery hues of crimson and gold. Patterson House had expanded its programs through the summer months, adding financial literacy workshops open to the community and a legal clinic staffed by volunteer attorneys specializing in elder law. The Methodist Church purchase had moved forward with renovations scheduled to begin in January. Eleanor's daily schedule had grown increasingly demanding. In addition to managing the shelter, she had been invited to speak at conferences on elder financial abuse, consult with other communities developing similar programs, and participate in a state-level task force on protective services for vulnerable adults. "You need help," Jessica insisted during their weekly planning meeting. "We should hire an assistant director before you collapse from exhaustion." Eleanor smiled, recognizing the irony. Once she had poured all her energy into serving Michael's needs. Now she needed reminders to pace herself in serving others. "You're right," she admitted. "I've been thinking about it for a while." The board approved the position unanimously. After interviewing several candidates, they offered the job to Rachel Chen, a social worker with experience in both nonprofit management and geriatric services. At 42, Rachel brought fresh energy and professional expertise that complemented Eleanor's lived experience and community connections. "We make a good team," Rachel observed after her first month. You know these women's hearts because you've walked their path. I know the systems they need to navigate because I've worked within them for years. As October neared its end, Eleanor received notice that Michael would be released on November 15th, having served 12 months of his sentence with time off for good behavior and completion of rehabilitation programs. He would transition to a halfway house in Oak Ridge, where he would serve 6 months of probation while working and continuing mandatory counseling. "How do you feel about his return?" Pastor Jim asked during one of their weekly check-ins. Eleanor considered the question carefully. Cautiously optimistic. His letters have been consistent, thoughtful, self-aware, focused on his recovery rather than expectations. "And your boundaries?" "Firm," she replied without hesitation. "I've made it clear that our relationship will develop slowly on neutral ground. He won't be coming to Patterson House, at least not initially. Too many of our residents have trauma associated with male family members." "You've come a long way from that night you arrived at Martha's boarding house," Pastor Jim observed. "Both of you have." The day of Michael's release arrived cold and clear. Eleanor didn't attend the proceedings, but sent a small care package to the halfway house, a warm sweater, a journal with her favorite pen, and a gift card to the local bookstore. She included a brief note. "One day at a time. I'm proud of your progress. When you're ready, call me, and we'll have coffee somewhere quiet. Mom." Life at Patterson House continued its steady rhythm. New women arrived, others departed for independent living situations with newfound confidence and skills. The nonprofit's first annual report showed impressive outcomes. 37 women served 23 successfully, rehoused over 200 community members, educated through workshops and speaking engagements. A week after Michael's release, he called Eleanor. "I got your package." He said, his voice stronger than it had been during their prison meeting. "Thank you. The sweater fits perfectly." "I'm glad," she replied, aware of both the mundane nature of the conversation and its profound significance. A mother and son talking normally after so much pain. "I found a job," he continued, "part-time at the recovery center helping with their intake process, and I'm continuing with GA meetings 3 times a week." "That's wonderful, Michael. One step at a time." They arranged to meet at a small cafe on the edge of town, neutral territory for both of them. When Eleanor arrived, Michael was already seated at a corner table, dressed in neat khakis and the sweater she had given him. He stood as she approached, uncertainty in his posture. "Mom," he said simply. "Michael." She offered a brief hug, then settled across from him. Their conversation was careful at first, focused on safe topics, the changing seasons, the books he was reading in his recovery program, the expansion of Patterson House. Gradually, the rhythm between them eased, moments of genuine connection emerging through the awkwardness. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad," Michael said as they lingered over second cups of coffee. "About his struggles with drinking in those early years, how he fought his way back. I never really appreciated what that took until now." Eleanor nodded, memories of those difficult years surfacing, Robert's determination, his daily choice to remain sober, the hard-won trust they had rebuilt together. "Your father would be proud of you for doing this work," she said. "He always believed people could change if they were willing to face themselves honestly." "I think he'd be prouder of you," Michael replied. "Creating something that helps so many people, that's his legacy too, isn't it? The house he built becoming a place of healing." As they prepared to leave, Michael hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I made this in the prison woodworking program," he explained, placing it on the table. "It's not much, but—" Eleanor opened the box to find a delicately carved wooden key, a symbol rather than a functional object. "It's to represent that I understand," Michael continued, his voice soft. "The house is yours. Your life is yours. I don't expect to reclaim what I lost through my own actions, but I hope maybe to build something new, a relationship based on respect rather than obligation." Eleanor closed her fingers around the wooden key, feeling its smooth contours, the care that had gone into its creation. "Thank you, Michael. This means more than you know." They parted with another brief hug, promises to call to meet again in a few weeks. No dramatic reconciliation, no erasing of the past, but a tentative step forward on a new path. As winter settled over Oak Ridge, Patterson House glowed with holiday decorations and the warmth of community. The women decorated a massive tree in the front window, strung lights along the porch railings, and filled the house with the aromas of holiday baking. On Christmas Eve, they hosted an open house for supporters, volunteers, and former residents. The rooms buzzed with conversation and laughter, the success of their first year evident in the faces of women who had arrived broken, but now stood tall sharing stories of their progress with newcomers still finding their way. Eleanor moved through the gathering greeting guests, ensuring everyone felt welcome. She had just stepped into the kitchen to refill the cookie trays when Jessica appeared at her elbow. "Michael is here," she said quietly. "With Pastor Jim. He's waiting on the front porch, didn't want to come in without your permission." Eleanor set down the tray, smoothed her festive red sweater, and made her way through the crowded rooms to the front door. Michael stood at the porch railing looking out at the snow-covered lawn where solar-powered lanterns created a glowing path to the gate. He turned as the door opened. Uncertainty and hope mingled in his expression. "I hope it's okay," he began. Pastor Jim thought, "It's fine," Eleanor assured him. "Come in from the cold." He hesitated. "I know some of the women here might be uncomfortable with me in their space. I just wanted to bring this." He indicated a large gift bag at his feet. "For the house." Eleanor lifted the bag, finding it filled with handmade wooden items, picture frames, small boxes, ornaments. "The guys at the recovery center have a woodworking group," Michael explained. "When I told them about Patterson House, they wanted to contribute something. Most of them have mothers or sisters or wives they're working to make amends with." Eleanor felt something shift within her chest, not forgiveness, which she had already given, but something quieter and more profound. Recognition, perhaps, of the ripples of healing extending outward from their shared pain. "Thank you," she said. "These are beautiful. Would you like to come in for just a moment? Meet Rachel, our new assistant director." Michael glanced toward the warm light spilling from the windows, then back at Eleanor. "I'd like that if you're sure." They entered together, mother and son both changed by their separate journeys, both still finding their way toward whatever relationship might be possible between them now. Not the relationship of the past that was gone forever, but perhaps something more authentic built on hard-won wisdom rather than unexamined expectations. Later, after the guests had departed and the women had retired to their rooms, Eleanor sat alone in the quiet living room watching the lights of the Christmas tree reflect in the window glass. Outside, fresh snow had begun to fall, covering the world in pristine white. She opened her notebook, now nearly filled with the chronicle of her journey, day 365. 1 full year since I walked away from a life of self-sacrifice into the unknown. Today we celebrated not just the holiday, but all we've created together, a community of women who refuse to be defined by what was taken from them. Michael visited briefly. The women were cautious but kind. He has found purpose in his recovery, helping others find their way back from addiction. We are both works in progress, our relationship a delicate rebuilding that may take years or may remain limited to these careful occasional connections. Either way, I am at peace with it. Tomorrow, the women will exchange small gifts. We'll share a meal. Some will call estranged family members, testing the waters of potential reconciliation. Others have chosen complete separation for their own protection and healing. Each path is valid, each woman the authority on her own journey. As for me, I find myself looking forward rather than back. The church renovation begins next month. Rachel brings fresh ideas daily. Jessica has applied to college, determined to finish the degree she abandoned when she married Michael. Pastor Jim is organizing an advocacy group for legislative changes to better protect vulnerable adults. Robert would be amazed to see what his house has become. Sometimes I feel him here in the sound of the old furnace kicking on in the creak of the porch swing, in the way light falls across the dining room table at breakfast. Not a ghost, but a foundation, the love that built these walls, now supporting new beginnings for women who thought their stories were ending. I don't know what the next year will bring. Michael's recovery may strengthen or falter. Patterson House may grow beyond my current vision or face unexpected challenges. My own role may evolve as I age and new leaders emerge. What I do know is this: when I walked away that October evening, suitcase in hand, I thought I was leaving everything behind. Instead, I was walking toward my true self, not just Eleanor the mother or Eleanor the wife, but Eleanor the builder, the visionary, the woman who turned pain into purpose. Life rarely gives us what we expect. The gift is in what we create from what we receive. Eleanor closed the notebook and rose, moving to the window. The snow continued to fall, each flake unique together, creating a landscape of possibility. She placed her hand against the cool glass, feeling the pulse of life in her veins, the strength in her aging fingers, the future waiting to be shaped. Outside, a car passed slowly, its headlights cutting through the snow. Then darkness again, peaceful and complete. Eleanor turned back to the warmth of the house she had reclaimed and transformed, no longer just shelter but sanctuary. No longer just hers, but theirs. A house of second chances built on the foundation of her first great act of self-respect, the courage to walk away, and the wisdom to build something new from what remained.